Welcome back to another edition of The Explainer. Today, we're diving into Straw Hat Origins Part 3, the tragedy that turned Nami into a thief. So, why exactly did Nami become a thief? When we first meet her, she's introduced as this cunning, manipulative pickpocket. She actively targets and robs pirates. She's obsessed with money, fiercely independent, and honestly, kind of a mystery. Viewers early on were just totally baffled by her. She joins Luffy and Zoro, but she constantly keeps them at arm's length. The massive question hovering over the whole early narrative is simply, why? What is driving this intense obsession with hoarding treasure? Well, the answer to that question completely shatters our initial perception of her. She wasn't stealing for money. She was stealing for freedom. Every single berry she hoarded, every pirate she tricked, every single dangerous situation she literally threw herself into, none of it was born out of greed. No way. It was born out of sheer, absolute desperation to buy back the lives of the people she loved. The dramatic irony here is just absolutely brilliant. To the world, and to us, the audience initially, the perception of Nami is that she's a greedy, traitorous pirate thief. But the horrifying reality? She is a deeply selfless kid who literally sacrificed her own soul, her childhood, and her reputation to save her family. She was forced to work for the exact same monster who murdered her mother, enduring the absolute worst kind of psychological torture, entirely in secret. To really get this, we have to trace the timeline of her trauma. It starts on a war-torn battlefield in the Oikote Kingdom, where a dying marine named Bellemere finds baby Nami and a young girl named Nijiko. Bellemere takes them in, bringing them to peaceful Cocoyasi Village. Now, they lived in poverty, surviving on the tangerines, or mekons, that Bellemere grew. But they were incredibly happy. Nami was even already showing this genius-level talent for drawing maps. But that warmth and nostalgia, it's violently shattered when the Arlong pirates invade. Arlong shows up and demands attacks on every single human life. And here's the breaking point. Bellemere simply didn't have enough money to pay for herself and her two adopted daughters. Now, she could have lied, right? She could have just said she had no children and survived. But she absolutely refused to deny her daughters. She selflessly chose to pay the tribute for Nami and Ochiko, sacrificing her own life to do it. As Arlong executes her right in front of the girls, Bellemere's final words to them are just, "I love you." It's a devastating moment, and it establishes the deep, unyielding root of Nami's trauma. So the crucial point we need to understand is the impossible burden placed on this grieving child's shoulders. Arlong notices Nami's genius mapping skills, kidnaps her, and forces her to become his cartographer. But she strikes a deal with the devil. If she can bring Arlong 100 million berries, he will sell Cocoyasi Village back to her and leave forever. 100 million! To put that into perspective, it's an insurmountable fortune. But it becomes Nami's solitary reason for living. Now, an interesting contrast to point out is how the recent Netflix live-action adaptation handled this compared to the original anime and manga. In the original story, we eventually learn that Nojiko and the villagers actually knew Nami's true intentions the whole time. They just pretended to hate her so she wouldn't bear the burden alone. But the live-action modernized the story by making her struggle totally isolating. In that version, she kept the secret completely to herself. Her village truly despised her as a traitor. It takes an already tragic backstory and just cranks the dial up on her emotional isolation. But even while living this dark double life, Nami couldn't help her true nature. Despite technically being a member of the Arlong Pirates, she was genuinely acting as the official third member of the Straw Hat crew from the very beginning. Think about it. She helped defeat Buggy, she risked her own life to help Usopp fight the Kuro pirates alone, and she even took a slash from Django just to retrieve Zoro's swords for him. She was already emotionally attached to this crew way before she officially joined them. Actually, taking a super quick detour behind the scenes, you might be surprised to know how Nami was originally envisioned. Early concept art by the creator, Eiichiro Oda, shows Nami wielding a giant battle axe and sporting a cybernetic robot arm. She had this heavily tomboyish, almost OG Dragon Ball vibe going on, and while those designs are incredibly cool, and Oda eventually recycled some of those concepts for other characters, her role ultimately shifted from a heavy hitter to the cunning, intelligent navigator we know today. Because she wasn't a superhuman monster like Luffy or Zoro, she had to compensate by utilizing her intellect, and her arsenal evolved drastically over time. She goes to Usopp, the crew's sniper, and has him build the Climatact, which is literally a weapon that manipulates the weather. Over time, this evolves into the perfect Climatact using Skypea dials, and later the sorcery Climatact, combining with Theria technology with Usopp's pop greens. She ends up pulling her own weight by literally weaponizing the climate. It's a real game changer.
Now, what's really interesting about this quote is how perfectly it captures not just the character's journey, but the creator's journey. Prior to the Arlong Park arc, the storytelling in this series was fun, but structurally, it was a bit simple. With this arc, Oda learned from his earlier lighter story beats and absolutely mastered his storytelling structure. He created a saga that is literally still considered one of the greatest in anime history.
The pure brilliance of Arlong Park is how perfectly integrated everything is. Oda ties the current villain directly to the new character's backstory. So defeating Arlong wasn't just about punching the bad guy, it was a direct resolution to Nami's trauma. When Luffy destroys Arlong's map room, he is physically destroying the prison of her childhood. Plus, the full crew gets individual validation battles, proving themselves as a cohesive unit. It is, for sure, narrative perfection. But before we get that satisfying victory, we have to experience Nami's absolute breaking point. After 8 grueling years of stealing, she finally collects the 100 million berries. But Arlong betrays her. He uses a corrupt marine captain to seize all of Nami's hidden treasure. In an instant, her 8 years of unbelievable sacrifice are entirely shattered, gone. The villagers, having finally seen enough, take up weapons and march toward Arlong Park to their certain deaths. This triggers what is easily one of the most devastating emotional sequences you will ever see. First, the betrayal is fully realized. Then, in utter psychological collapse, Nami grabs a knife and violently begins stabbing her own shoulder, desperately trying to carve the Arlong pirate tattoo right out of her skin. It's so hard to watch. Then, Luffy stops her, and she finally pleads for help. And lastly, Luffy responds by placing his prized straw hat on her head. Luffy, help me. It's just 3 little words, but guys, the weight behind them is astronomical. Remember, as a child, right after Bellemere died, Nami made a promise to herself. She promised she would be strong, that she would never cry, and that she would never ask for help again. So to utter these words, it means she has been completely, utterly broken by her oppressor. And this brilliantly illustrates the foundation of their entire dynamic. Luffy doesn't hesitate. He doesn't ask questions. He places his greatest treasure, the physical embodiment of his own dream, the straw hat, directly on Nami's head. He is sharing his ultimate trust with her, communicating entirely nonverbally that she is just as important to him as his most prized possession. It's this ultimate promise that she's no longer alone. What makes Nami's character so absolutely incredible is the long-term narrative payoff of her trauma. Years later, she meets Jinbei, a fishman who reveals that he was actually the one responsible for releasing Arlong into the East Blue. He was the catalyst for her suffering. But Nami, showing unbelievable emotional maturity and kindness, flat out refuses to hold on to resentments. She forgives Jinbei, completely breaking the cycle of racial hatred and proving once and for all that Arlong never truly corrupted her soul. Let's move on and see how this builds, because this incredible resilience created a massive legacy. Just look at her bounty progression. She goes from an enslaved child drawing maps in a dungeon to a pirate with a 16 million berry bounty, then 66 million, all the way up to a staggering 366 million berries. She went from stealing change just to survive to becoming a world-class navigator and one of the most formidable, highly valued pirates on the seas. So what's the big takeaway here? Nami didn't become a thief by choice. She sacrificed everything, her safety, her reputation, her entire childhood, to protect her family and her village. She bought their freedom with her pain. But our journey through the crew doesn't end here. We've seen the tragedy of the navigator, but what happens when a natural-born coward is forced to become a brave warrior of the sea? Join us in our next explainer as we dive into Straw Hat Origins Part 4 and explore the tall tales of Usopp. Until then, keep learning and stay focused.